Greetings, everyone. I am Donna Battle, and this is our fifth episode of Talks with GAWD. So, my sisters and I, along with so many of our ancestors, have been fed stories of scarcity. And those stories have also been reinforced by real life experiences born out of an intentionally oppressive culture to teach us that there simply isn't enough for us. Not enough space for us to thrive, not enough money to make ends meet, not enough room for us all to be successful, not enough beauty to extend to the coils of our hair or the hues of our skin. Simply not enough. But there is a rebuttal woven into our experiences as well, one that speaks to the abundance of creativity and imagination. One of my favorite poets, Lucille Clifton, once wrote that we cannot create what we cannot imagine. Creativity is a direct reflection of how we are created in the image of the Creator. The resourcefulness of our ancestors is an inheritance of accessing abundance despite the powers that seek to deny that access. This use of imagination and creativity as a resource makes tangible the belief that all things are possible. It is the gift that keeps on giving, creatively finding ways to always ensure that there is enough for life, enough for faith, enough for joy, enough for grace, enough to rise again tomorrow and live. It is the lived testimony that lives often cast aside or rendered invisible are not only cared for, but provided for and sustained. It is a hidden abundance born of necessity, tapped into and practiced to the point of perfection. It is perhaps the place of peace and contentment in a world obsessed with gluttony. So let's talk about it.
Hello, welcome to episode 5 of Talks with GAWD. I am Margaret A. Brunson, and I am really excited about our conversation today. But first, I want to introduce you to the other 4 beautiful women who make up GAWD, the grown-ass women's delegation. So first, to my left, right here, is the Reverend Dr. Donna Coletrane Battle. And then this way is the Reverend Shalise Overy. And then right here is the Reverend Lisa Yaboa. And right here is the Reverend Angela Whitenhill Shields. That's a tongue twister. So welcome to episode 5, which will be led by the fearless, the most beautiful, the most lovely and intelligent Reverend Dr. Donna Coletrane Battle.
Yay! Thank you, Dr. Margaret. Well, you saw the introductory video, and so one of the things that I have been praying for my community in this season is that the divine would provide manna in the wilderness. And there is a passage of scripture from Exodus where the children of Israel have come out of enslavement under Egypt, and they are in the wilderness. And when manna is provided by God, on one of the days, God says, only take what's enough, right? So only take enough on that day. And one of the things that appeals to me in that is that when I think about the history, particularly of people of color and Black people in particular in this country, that so much of our narrative, so much of our experience has been based upon scarcity or there not being enough. And Pastor Lisa, preaches and teaches a lot around scarcity mentality. And it is woven into what we've been taught to believe, but it's also coupled with and reinforced by very real disparities. So I want to give a disclaimer. I am not in any way saying that people do not live in scarcity. We do. There are economic and systemic injustices that create major gaps in all levels of access to what people need. What I am saying, though, and what we are going to be talking about today is, one, how our community has thrived despite those gaps and despite that narrative, but two, that those things were created, that those things don't have to be, that just because systems have been created in such a way where there isn't enough for certain people, it doesn't mean that there isn't enough across the board. But our focus today is really on creativity and imagination as it relates to our spirituality, as it relates to us being able to meet our needs. And I know the women in my family in particular wove into me, like they beat into me this idea that it doesn't matter, we can make it work. We can figure it out. We can make it work. How many times I saw that, right? That, well, what did you do, mama, when that happened? Well, we just figured it out. We made it work. Let's sit down and talk through it. And so I want us to kind of dialogue about this. There are many different avenues that this could go down, and I know we don't have a lot of time, but I want to start by just asking, what are some of the ways, what are some of the creative and imaginative ways that you all experienced your family, your community, meeting the needs of themselves or people that they loved while you were growing up or even now?
The first thing that came to my mind might sound so crazy. I don't even know if I can say this, but selling food stamps. You not like how and I'm so glad, Donna, you said that, but because there are real systems, right, that when people, there are real reasons, systemic reasons why people don't have enough, right? And so if you get that little, that little food aid or whatever, you know what I'm saying, you might not need all of it, but you need some other stuff too. So you sell that, and that bless somebody else so they can get some food, and you can get those necessities that you need for. So and I'm here for it. If that's what we got to do. But the other thing I think about is I just remember that when I was younger growing up, my mom and my family had often just lived together a few 3 generations in the house. And my mom was finally got a job, and she was able to purchase a house, and they continue, and it was a big house, and they continued to live, right? And people came in and out as they were making transitions, and that was a way that there was kind of always enough. And then the last thing that I think about is if the church needed money and they were having a rally and they set an amount, my grandma was gonna get that money, period. She was gonna call all of us. I don't care where we lived. I don't care if we hadn't been to church in years. She was gonna get that money some kind of way. She was gonna sell chicken dinners. She was gonna get that money. And which reminds me that it's there, right? And if we, when we can set an intention around it and invite others to participate in it, then we find it. And I think we need to, if we can do that for the church, and honestly, many of these churches that, really weren't serving us all that well all the time, then we can do it for our business endeavors. We can do it for other things as well. So that's what I've seen.
Yeah, that's good stuff.
I'll piggyback off of that just because you hit one of mine, sharing, just kind of girl fashion sharing. A lot of my family will move in together in time period, whether we're transitioning to another city or out of school or something happened. And it's like a 7-month, 8-month kind of normal practice that you do, that I just find I'll have friends do that with me now. Now that my family's not here, I'll have friends come stay with me and stuff, just transition. The other one was reusing materials. We have other terms for them, but my family is king at or queen at literally to this day. So my child throws food on the floor and my dad's staying with us. So he just got a trash bag, cut it out and puts it underneath. You get mats for kids. You can buy mats for $15. We're just going to use the same trash bag for 3 months. And it works perfectly. And people could see this as oh, it's ghetto or whatever. I'm like, this is genius. It just makes sense. Why do something else? So him and his brother, when they had the black box cable, literally drilled holes through our house and made the cable splice through the whole house. So we, because this is share cable, which was illegal at the time, But this idea of like sharing and then reusing materials, my whole life, we have plenty of money now and we'll still do it. It's just kind of who we are. The last one's just celebrating. We like to celebrate. So I think it's so important that we celebrate without purchases or gifts. So there's like, whether it's like songs we'll do, or certain parties, like we do this party, if you quit your job, we do parties. It's just kind of part of the freedom of spaces. But this idea of celebrating things that aren't so much occasional, like standard wise, and then not buying gifts, just doing food, hanging out, playing games, reusable games. My parents came out of poverty and now we're not anymore. And some people can see that as like you don't have to survive, but I see it as it helps the environment. Like we don't need to buy all the stuff just because we can at this point. So it doesn't feel like a negative thing.
Yeah, I'll piggyback on that, Angela, because two of the things I wrote down just as notes is, I think Black people are the original like environmentalists. I just feel like, we know how to repurpose and reuse and reduce waste and recycle. Like all of that started in with our people. So I'm just gonna go ahead and claim that, like we are the original environmentalists, along with our indigenous brothers and sisters in the Native American community. But I watched my mom, who is the quintessential like organizer. My mom is just on point with her organization. And I always tell her, like, Ma, if you were, growing up in a different time, like now, you would probably be a millionaire for your like organizational skills. Because my mom always sees another purpose of something that most people would throw away. So like she'll take labels off cans, like big cans, and she'll create like a candle holder out of it. And I'm like, Mom, where did that idea come from? So that creativity of, let me not just make something for beauty's sake, but also let me make something functional out of things that people would consider trash. That's just always been something that I was exposed to. And that started with her mother and her mother's mother, who out of scarcity said, we can't afford to throw these things away. We need to figure out how else we can use these things. And then the other purpose that I think, is important is that some of it was for preservation's sake. So when you think about like these quilts that follow family members, they become like heirloom quilts, and, they're made from scraps and things that, were dear to people, but they wanted to preserve those memories, or they wanted to preserve those things. So that creativity and imagination was for a purpose, and it was also, or functional purpose, and it was also for like preservation's sake. Like, these are our stories, these are our treasures. We may not have a lot of money, but these are the things that are now going to be of value to us as a family. So those are some of the things I've seen.
You all have basically taken all of my things, from plastic bags that can literally be used for moisturizing your hair to a lunch bag for back to school. You name it, a plastic
shower
bag.
cap.
It has been used many a ways.
For the hair dye.
If you see a plastic bag strewn on a beach, don't come looking at me, because it wasn't me. You all basically have said everything that I can think of. Just two things that I would just add is, my parents are from Ghana, West Africa, and I watch how there is no part of any food item that we eat that isn't somehow used. Like, so if you make fish and you eat the kind of the flesh of the fish, you grind down the bones so that the bones can be used for a meal, to like add more protein to a broth. Like everything is purposed in some particular way to add like sustenance. And where some people might say, oh, there's a lack of protein sources in these parts of the world, it's like, no, we can figure out like how to have groundnut soup, or figure out ways to meet those needs. But I think the other way that just kind of imaginative and creative, just all the potlucks that I've ever been to in my life, that what looks like little in one person's hands, when it's also added to the quote unquote little in somebody else's hands. We bring a little bit of this, we bring a
Mm.
little bit of that. And before you know it, we have like this phenomenal meal after a church event or for someone's celebration. And it's never on one person to make the
Yeah.
thing go, but everyone brings their thing. And that's what actually is like beauty on top of beauty on top of beauty on top of beauty. So I just think the way in which collectively we bring our things, we bring our plastic bags, and then we make something greater.
Mm.
Yeah, the ultimate potluck, right? We just potluck all over the place. Well, my mom and my grandmother used to take the small pieces of soap that got really tiny that we washed with, and they would soak them in water and would make liquid soap, liquid hand soap. And so we would gather it, and then we would be able to use it in a different way. And then I can remember growing up and, you know, wanting to be creative, and my mom sat me down. My mom also grew up in poverty and was the first in our family to attend college, worked her way through college. And she said, you know, Donna, I want to show you what I used to do as a little girl. And she showed me how she would take, because her parents couldn't afford to buy her dolls, she would take cardboard or paper and cut dolls out. And then she showed me how wherever she would get, you know, newspaper or different things, she would design clothes, and how she would cut the clothes out and put a little piece over it so that she could hang it. And I had paper dolls as a child because she wanted me to access the creative ways that even as a child, they had to find ways to bring joy or to access things because they didn't have it before. But you all have said a few things that are a good segue to our next question. Shalise, I think you mentioned, you know, what it means for us to collectively set an intention and work towards it. And then Lisa, you brought us back to this really communal aspect, right? That it's not this individualistic thing, like there isn't this loneliness, like scarcity creates loneliness, but that creativity and imagination invites community. It invites the dispelling of this loneliness. And so how do you see then the role of spirituality as it relates to creativity and imagination? So when we think about, for those of us who have who are descendants or ancestors of the formerly enslaved in this country, how spirituals were used, right? So it wasn't just in food and things of that nature, but that the necessity extends to all things. So that spirituals were used to communicate something because they needed to be creative and imaginative in order to access freedom and have means of freely communicating. So what would you say is I don't know that we talk a lot about the role of imagination and creativity in spirituality, but what would you say that connection is for you?
This is, oh, go ahead, Margaret.
No, go ahead. I go after you.
I just, you know, I get my rant. This is such a touch point. I appreciate this question. I have a real strong conviction around economics and my spirituality, so that you'll hear me talk about all the time. And sometimes I can rant too much, but my parents were in poverty, and I was raised very affluent. So I'm like the Blackish episode. That's my culture. Not so, I say unfortunately, but I struggle with that. And what I found is that the more money we had, and I don't think poverty is good, the more money we had, the more pressure it was to not rely on each other, to believe in scarcity because you earned it, so you hold on to it. And so I'm the two foundation elements of my faith are womanist theology and Black liberation theology. And in Black liberation theology, the key element is that God is the God of the oppressed. And it doesn't glorify poverty or oppression. What I hear in that is that, like, the Spirit of God loves everybody, but the Spirit of God dwells particularly uniquely with people who are in need. And it's not that I want to promote being in need, but there's something about being in need being a very human and beautiful moment in which the Spirit intersects and kind of dwells and fills in the gap. And the more affluence that we have, the least need I have. And I find my own spiritual and emotional skills of coping, they start eroding when I have everything. I can just buy my way to the front line. I can just, oh, nobody showed my birthday, I'm gonna buy my own stuff for my birthday. And I start not needing in a way that when my spirit and my heart emotionally and spiritually is needing people or is needing to rely, I don't know how anymore. Like I have to learn how to be in humility or in a space. And so for me, a long story short, also women's theology, one of the main things that stands out to me is this idea that God doesn't necessarily, we don't all get liberated. Black women are constantly having to struggle, but that's not necessarily negative. It's just that the life of Christ, or somehow the living out, the making the way out of no way, is the movement of God. And so I find so much power with when I'm around people, or even myself, when I'm in a space of a meeting, or just appreciating creativity that comes out of constraint in that way. And I see God when not that poverty is God or oppression is God, but when people somehow are resilient in the face of oppression, I'm like, that's God. And I can't access that God when I have too much. So this is something I struggle with, or at least sit with in my own self. I don't want too much. You know, I want to always have to need each other so that I can keep my spirituality healthy, if that makes sense.
Yeah. It's much harder to recognize our need when we feel like we can meet our own needs. Yeah. Sure.
Yeah, I got caught up in that. I was like, I want to take some notes. I want to stay there, but I will not. I'm going to answer the question. We can come back to that. I think on the next question, I might have something to say. So as I thought about this question, you know, I think about how, you know, if we are shaped and formed in the image of God, and we see God as a creator, then we have to see that, we have to know that when God looks at us, like, God sees a creator, right? So like, for me, creativity and imagination are a spiritual practice. You know, they are one and the same. To be creative and to be imaginative is to be spiritual, because we were shaped and formed and come from the ultimate creator, which means we too are creators. And I'm a big believer in our ability to create the reality that we want. And I know sometimes that's at odds with this idea of that reality, or that belief, is oftentimes at odds with kind of our current reality, that there is systemic oppression, there is systemic racism, there are all of these barriers that keep us from accessing some of the things that we deserve, honestly, in this country. And yet, I still hold in this hand that we do have the ability to create the reality we want. And some of it is this idea of abundance, right? This idea of an abundance mentality, even in the midst of scarcity, that we have the ability to create what we want. And some of that is through community. A lot of it, most of it will be communally and through community. So I guess all of that to say, I see creativity as a spiritual practice. And I think if we ever get to a place where we're not tapping into our own creativity, I think that's where we may be, that may be a place where we are disconnected from God. Because if we are connected to God, the creator, there's never a shortage of ideas or ways that we can, you know, create different realities, or have what we need, or access what we need. Sometimes it's thinking outside of ourselves and moving outside of ourselves and asking for help, which is also important. You know, asking, what do others have to give? If we all decided we were going to bake a cake, and, you know, I say I have the eggs and you have the flour and you have whatever else goes into a cake. Is it milk?
No word. We got
butter.
you.
Somebody brings the butter. Somebody makes the frosting. But then at the end of the day, we're all going to eat this cake together. And I feel like when we're sitting in ourselves and saying, I got to bake this cake, but I only have eggs, what am I going to do? And we're not looking up and looking around to see who else is around us that can bring something to this, you know, this process, then we've lost our ability to imagine and reimagine, and make space for what I think God wants to give us, like through our creativity and imagination. So.
You helped me, girl. I got thoughts, but we'll come back. That is helping me a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like creativity is foundational to Black spirituality, because, like, how do you take an oppressive faith and allow it to fuel your drive and your striving for freedom, right? You had to ooh, you had to see that thing in a much different way than it was given to you. Like you had to reimagine the scriptures. Like you had to reimagine God on your side. Like, you know, like Angela was saying when we talk about liberation theology, not on the side, you know, of your oppressors. And so, yeah, like I think, you know, and we gotta, and so that just reminds us, even in this day, right? Like we gotta be able to see, like for our own liberation, beyond the options that people are giving us. And that's gonna be key moving forward as we press our leaders toward, you know, the future that we want to see, as well as create it for ourselves, right? Because I'm not under the constriction that like whoever is in leadership is going to determine what will be. Like that's one or two people versus billions, right? We have more power to create the future that we want to see, and we got to be able to see options beyond what people are giving us, because those options are too limiting.
Yes.
Yeah, I want to kind of jump on what Shalice said. Something that I've just been churning on is, you know, the very first act that we celebrate in Holy Scriptures is God's creative act. You know, that God looks at all that is chaotic. The wind of God sweeps over the dark waters and brings forth light. God looks at everything that God creates and says it not just good, but that it's very good. Then God maps us with God's very image. It's like from the very beginning, God says this thing that you're going to be invited into flows out of me being a creative God. Like I'm always doing a new thing. And I believe like we carry that within ourselves, that we're always doing a new thing. We're always dreaming new things. We're always visioning new vision. So I think you cannot have, I think you cannot have spirituality divorced from understanding creativity and creating. I mean, I think that's what it is to even say you were spiritual, is to be able to have some sense that there's more. But something that Shalice said that just kind of strikes me, because Donna, when you asked this question, my second thought kind of went to the people in my life who I have seen how creativity and imagination has shaped their spirituality. And for me, it always goes back to the church mothers, because if their spirituality was shaped by the way in which the empire told them what they should want and yearn and strive for, empire ain't it. Like they got duped, bamboozled at every single turn. And yet, like they could go to a wedding and believe something about love even when we weren't loved. They could go to like I think about, I grew up with women who worked in people's homes, set tables for people's families, and could not sit down at those same tables. Yet they would carve out space every third Sunday for my family to come and sit down at a table, and they would make it like the most, I used to think there was like such glory and power in those moments. You have to be able to see beyond what we can see.
Yeah.
You have to be operating out of something other than just what you see is what you get. I mean, there's just no way any of us would be able to get out of the bed if we had an empire-shaped lens, if we had an empire-shaped imagination. It has to be something more expansive. And I just watching the people in my life who walked really difficult roads, but they walked those roads with their heads up high, like they had every right to be here, even when everything else was not the case. I just think you have to really trust that a creating God makes us a creating people, so that when we're in the midst of something that is not for us, you can always see something more. And it's not like being delusional. It's literally like Walter Brueggemann talks about hoping against the data. Like your eyes can see beyond what they can actually see. Your heart can like feel beyond what you have in front of you. Your hands can feel even what's kind of beyond your grasp. So I don't know that you can be. I think imagination is what, like having an expanded imagination is what shapes how we are spiritual.
Because you mind if I jump in real quick some on that? You have to have audacity to hope beyond what you see. And the only way to have audacity is to have like a strong sense of self-worth or value. So when you said that, Lisa, I thought part of the Imago Dei, or this idea that we're made in the image of God, was distorted by oppression and ripped from us by oppression. So when I hear you talk, I think like in the very practice of hoping or seeing beyond what our current oppressors tell us, we're saying, the shirt that I love that my sis gave Margaret Brunson, her Illuminate, like, hold on a second, show me. Tell me the full name. Give us the right full name of I'm like messing it all up.
Oh, my business,
Yes.
Illumines Leadership Solutions, the love life.
I love life. I've been a recipient of this leadership and love. But just like the shirt says, I have to actually believe I'm enough to have that hope. And so that, I love what you said, Lisa, like it's almost like a fruit of the spirit is the audacity to hope, to actually be like, no, I am an image of God. Like I'm worth or deserve more than what I'm having. That you can't not have that in spirituality, right? So.
Yeah, no, that's powerful. I often say that hope is not seeing the way out, it's believing there always is a way out, right? And that is kind of the essence of what we're talking about, is that I might not be able to see it now, but because I know it's there, I can always reach for it. I can always reimagine. We can keep pressing for it. And then Lisa, you said something else that reminded me of conversations we've had about the difference between vision and dreams, right? That dreams kind of happen when we're asleep. We don't really know the reality of things, right? Like I dream about going to a country that I've never been to before, but when I get there, it may be any number of ways different from how I dreamed it, because I dreamed it lacking certain knowledge and information. But vision is very different. Vision is in light of the present circumstances. You can clearly see everything. Despite all of that, I am now casting something beyond that. I have all the information. My eyes are awake. And I think the spiritual nuance here, there's so many different nuances that can happen, but the spiritual nuance for me, I can remember several years ago going to my first jury duty and finding out that I parked in the wrong parking deck. And in order to get out of the deck I was in, I had to pay money, but they didn't take cards and I didn't have any cash. And I can remember saying, I don't have any cash. He's like, well, can you look around? Like, I don't take cards. I don't know what to tell you, right? He was being really hard about me not getting out of this garage. And I'm like, well, am I gonna have to get out of my car, ask somebody for some money? Like, what am I gonna have to do? And I started to look around. I think it was something like 90 cents. It was some off number, you all, between the coins under my mat, between my seat and in, the little pull-up compartment. It was the exact amount, not a penny over, not a penny under. It was the exact enough. Like having enough in that moment, like the exact amount, not having more or less. That was such a God moment for me. Like it was so clear that this was God in this very small, mundane way, that it brought me an abundance of joy. So though I only had enough of this, it created in me a sense of spiritual joy that was so overwhelmingly abundant that I couldn't be anything but happy. I went right on back up in there and they dismissed me and I bounced and walked my way right on back down to my car. That even just in this experience of thinking I had scarcity, right? Thinking I was going to be short what I needed and ended up having just enough, created abundance in a different area of my spiritual being and essence. And that is, for me, another piece of this that is just so powerful. That is the kind of stuff that creates hope. It's the kind of stuff that strengthens faith, because once I now have that memory, once I have that experience, the next time I'm in a similar situation with higher stakes, I can remember this is similar. This has happened. If it has happened before, it's possible. And now all of a sudden, there's this building of faith, there's this building of trust, and there's this building and the stretching of imagination, which allows you to take greater risk with creativity because you know what God has done before. And so, with Margaret, you got anybody want to jump in before we go to the next?
So I think I do, but you can go to the next question because that's part of my answer.
Okay. So I want us to go ahead and answer this question. Where in our society, in our community, in our lives, do we see gaps? Gaps where more imagination and creativity are needed right here, right now.
So I want to try to weave a couple of thoughts together here. And it's, one of them is kind of the inverse of what you just said. And it goes back to something Angela just mentioned. So I think that oftentimes within our community, we have an abundance of some of the things we actually don't need, right? So like there's an abundance of trauma. There's an abundance of, you know, just low self-worth, the inability to see yourself as enough to, there's an abundance of a lack of confidence, and we know why. We know why these things exist, you know, so I don't have to run down the litany of reasons why there is an abundance of these things in our community. And at the same time, I think that impedes us from being able to make space for the things that do want to come to us, right? Or that God does want to give us. And so it's difficult to see, and this is kind of the inverse of what you just said, is that when you had enough, it gave you an abundance of joy. But when you have an abundance of the things that you don't need, that are harmful to you, it keeps you from seeing or even receiving the things that you actually need or even desire. Because let's also talk about, yes, we have needs that we want to meet, but we are also humans with desires and wants. And some of those things aren't necessarily our needs. They're just things that we want to live a fulfilling life. And so I think scarcity shows up in a lot of ways in our community. And, you know, one of those ways, of course, is economic. And the spirit of capitalism, you know, also causes us to compete with each other. So, you know, whereas when people didn't have enough and they had to rely on their neighbors and they had to rely on people in the community, there wasn't this spirit of competition. But, you know, to Angela's point earlier, the more we attained, the more we hoarded and tried to keep it all to ourselves. And so now we see a competition. We are in competition with each other. There's not enough for you. If I give you what I have, or even I share an idea with you, then you might take it and run with it. You're going to be rich, and here I'm going to be over here still trying to make ends meet, as opposed to saying, let's work together. Let's create this thing together, and we both share in the fruit of our labor and our work. But the other way that I think scarcity shows up for us is it keeps us from being able to see that there are other ways, there are other forms of currency, right? So like, for example, in my business, when I work with other business owners or other people who may have something to offer me, we barter. Because if you have a service that I need, I have a service that you need, why are we even introducing money into this conversation? Why don't we just barter? You know, I give and you give. That's abundance. That's an abundance mentality. Scarcity says, I don't know if I have enough to pay Margaret. I don't know if I have enough money to pay Margaret. So I'm just not going to reach out to her. But what else do you have to give? Like, what else do you have of value that we can actually exchange value? And there's nothing wrong with that. But I think capitalism, the spirit of capitalism, keeps us from being able to see that we actually do have more than what we think we have. But because our value is so situated and placed in the amount of money that we have in the bank, we don't see that that's just one currency. There are lots of other currencies that we operate in every day. Prayers can also be another form of currency if we see it that way. So like, anyway, I just think that this is something that I'm very passionate about. Yeah.
Girl.
Go ahead.
Y'all see how Margaret tried to lead us into the glory cloud and then pretend she didn't take us into the glory cloud. Yeah. She drops us over here at the bus stop to the glory cloud.
I'm
Prayer is a currency. Yes, God.
Yes. Because what you named, I think, goes back to what I said earlier about, you know, some of us believe, one of the things I was going to say is that we think money equals freedom. And I've heard people say this in all kinds of ways, right? And what you're naming for me, I've experienced money. I was raised with it, and it doesn't. And so you're just kind of sitting there like, well, now what? That you, like the other day, other currencies. Oh, that's what I'm saying. That money as we know it, or capital as we know it, value as we know it, is drenched in white supremacy, patriarchy, heteronormativity, all these very oppressive value systems. So if we're obtaining the golden ticket within the structure, you're limited to the ways in which the people on top have told you what they value. And what I heard Margaret say is like creativity and being, like I named earlier, being oppressed or being somehow with the spirit in a unique way. You can see all these forms, not to say that the forms that we currently have, we do need money to get things, sure. But we can also barter, and we can also, have these other ways and methods that I think when you have creativity based in this kind of spirit that moves outside of the current structure, you can see it. And so just to say yes and amen to what you said, my only point to that was, I think the process of getting the money in my mind and the why of getting the money is actually way more important. That's how I understand success than the outcome of having the money, having been with somebody with money. If my why is because I don't feel pretty, so I'm gonna go buy all the stuff to feel pretty, I'll never feel pretty, right? If my process is I'm shanking everybody, cutting through my sisters to somehow monopolize, I'm actually not going to reach success. So I think that scarcity in terms of that outcome, we all see outcome, and I'm like, it's not outcome that gives you freedom. It's really the process and the why.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was just thinking too about like what Margaret said, like when we take like like why are we even talking about money? And then like when we take it out of the equation, like we begin to value people because like capitalism says people don't have no money, have no value, right? And it's like, no, that's not true. Like they have much to be able to contribute to society, and so yeah, and there's a way in which I feel like kind of like when you do take money out of the equation, it supports kind of a more like communal feel, right? Because when we have this thing that kind of like the money as a middleman to the transaction, it kind of eliminates this need for community. But like when you're bartering, it's like, okay, like I'm engaging and interacting with this person, and I'm naming their value and they're naming mine. So yeah, I love that.
Shalise, I want to say something right there too, because that's a good point you just made. I think the part of the issue, so I make money. I have no problem making money because we need money to live. And I also believe, to Angela's point, that, the way I make my money, if and when I get to a place of overflow and abundance, and in that regard, I want to give. I want to help other people, figure out how to follow their dreams and achieve their definition of success. But the other part of that too, Shalise, is when you take money out of the equation, people can see their own sense of self-worth, and they can also see the ways in which we conflate worth and value. So no one can ever pay you a dollar amount based on your self-worth. There is no dollar amount that could be exchanged for your self-worth. But what it also does is when you have a good understanding of the value of money, it also will not give away your work to people and devalue your work. So no one can pay you what you are worth, but people can pay you for your work. So your work,
I just wanted, yeah.
So your work has a value, and it needs to be y'all got me distracted. People can pay you for your work. They can't pay you your worth. And I think as Black women in particular, this is something that I'm very adamant about. Y'all know this about me, but like when people try to devalue what I offer, we also take that as a devaluation of our worth, and we should see it in that way. But they can't pay us what we're worth. but I can definitely place a value on my work that says, no, you need to pay me. I'm not going to do this for free. And the reality is you wouldn't ask someone else to do this, right, for pennies. So why am I taking less than what I deserve? So anyway, I got me stirred up over here.
Girl, because you just made the
You
connection
stirred
between,
up.
like, money being tied to our value as people, and that was the sin. Like, that is the misnomer. And so we still do it when we say, oh, I'll do this for this much, and I shouldn't charge. I'm like, well, no, like, I'm still devaluing myself based on this money scale. And you're saying, no, don't do that.
Yes, Angela, because slavery in this country, slavery was our first labor system. It was our first labor system. So Black bodies, there was a price. There was a price of value to our worth. But God liberated us from that. Like when we were free from slavery, we were also free from having our bodies and our souls, like a dollar amount placed on that. And I refuse to allow anybody to place a dollar amount on my worth. Now, I'm going to place a dollar amount on the work that I do because I know what the value of that is. But you don't have enough money in the bank to pay me my self-worth. You just don't. And go ahead, Donna.
I was just going to say, I think it's also worthy to note, to your point, Margaret, because no, this is good stuff, okay? To your point, just as there was a dollar amount placed on our bodies and our worth as people, our labor was free. Our work at that time was free, which is why we have been trailing, right? There has been this resentment to pay us for our work, right? Because now you can no longer. Right. So I want people to make these connections that this is why there are gaps, economic and wealth gaps, because the work was free when that is what should have had a price applied to it.
That's right. So what Margaret is saying, just flip the script on that, and we gotta press into it.
Yes.
Yep, we do. We do. We do.
You know, because they say all the time, and you know, y'all know, we go somewhere and preach, and they say, now, we can't pay you what you're worth. And I always say, well, you can try, but I'm gonna start saying,
no, but you can pay me
for my work, though.
That's right.
So that's what Martha A. Brunson said.
What Kamala taught us. Can I have my equal time, please? At least you give me that equal time.
Okay.
Yeah, my bishop said, you can pay me for this sermon work, though.
That's huge. And I know people watching might go, you know, you can run with this in a lot of negative ways, but I think what I'm hearing is we are responding to centuries of being devalued. So it's not just people feeling like, oh, they think they're more than their work is more. It's saying, no, we're coming from a level in which people literally ask us stuff for free that they would never ask other people. So there's going to be a couple centuries that we're going to have to maybe even overinflate to make up for the percentage. We all know mortgages and how money builds. But in my mind, I'm just like, it's not, my own sensibility goes, oh, I feel bad, you know, claiming and all this stuff. It's a starting from not having, not starting equal. We're not equal in this way. We are equal in God's eyes, but we are not equal in terms of systemic oppression around our money and capitalism. So,
and in addition to that, Angela, also to having everything mapped about our beauty, intellect, whatever it is, always from this lens of it's a deficit.
Yes.
Deficit. And then being told that what it looks like to be abundant is if you look like the construct of whiteness, which is just like, well, that's empire, that's not kingdom, you know? So you're always living in this in-between place of knowing deep down inside, that's not the picture of abundance, but I've been told that's the picture of abundance. And everyone keeps on telling me that I'm the standard for scarcity. Like literally, anyway.
And also to that point, Aaron, in response to what like Angela said, like, now, so I'm not going to say that I'm worth more than anybody else. Like, I believe we're all fearfully and wonderfully made. And sometimes our work do be better, point blank, period, right? So I've had people push back on me, you know, in an organization when I get ready to pay somebody that's a Black woman in particular, right, say, well, we don't even pay people that much to do such and such over here. I'm like, because they ain't good. But like, if you want, so okay, that's fine, because they're not hitting on nothing. But if you want me to bring this person in here that's gonna do the thing, then I'm gonna pay them, because this is where they have valued their work.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I know I'm belaboring. It's because the standard of competent is not, that's not, their standard says we don't pay, we're not in the standard. You ask us to do something that's above and beyond the current standard that is not created. So I hear you, like the idea of us being better. I think we're just more, we have other skills. We code switch the hell out of stuff. We know how to come in and out where you other people couldn't. And I just think that is deserving of a, if the scale of competency was really diverse, then yes, we have 14 other things we do in the same second that some people don't do. So
again, because of our forced imagination and creativity, right? Margaret, you got to unmute for a minute, because you got to
say your
line.
line.
You got to speak to this. Yeah.
Y'all setting it up today.
making me curse.
This conversation is litty. No, Angela, what you just said, you know, I mouthed the word mediocrity. The standard is mediocrity. So anytime whiteness is a culture of mediocrity. I'm not saying white people are mediocre. I'm saying that whiteness is mediocrity. So anytime whiteness is the standard, it is mediocre. So anytime you present yourself in that environment and you're essentially, they see you as overvaluing yourself, it's because you are higher value than mediocrity. So you're going to have to pay me. Like, this is excellence. This is not mediocrity. That standard that you have, I started, like, my baseline is higher than that. My baseline is higher than mediocrity. Can I add on there, also patriarchy, also heteronormativity. All dominant cultures don't have to strive because you're dominant. So everybody else has to do everything other else to catch up. So their baseline starts. And I think it's beautiful to say, if not so much of your otherness, I do think race is different, you know, but I appreciate you saying, like, the baseline is the mediocrity. And people who are under that are already catching that because they have to, you know. So sorry, y'all. This is really helpful. That's so good. I think, which to your point, Donna, is why why we have been so creative and imaginative, because we don't see ourselves represented anywhere. Think about the fact that we're still experiencing first, like, oh, the first Black person to do this, and it's 2020, but we've always been represented in our own community. We've always had Black business owners. We've always had Black artists. We've always had people reimagining and imagining, making and remaking. Like, this is not new to us.
That's
and
right.
to your point, Lisa, like, you know, oftentimes our creativity is taken and co-opted and rearranged and reorganized and called something else.
Repackaged.
Exactly. And then says, oh, this is wonderful. This is the standard now. Or sold back to us. No.
But no seasoning on it.
That's the history and the story of the commodification of our bodies and our work.
Yeah.
It recycles itself, and we have to keep snatching it back.
That's right.
We have to keep holding the line. And so maybe we need to even be creative and imaginative in the ways we make sure we do not continually allow people to perpetuate the commodification of our life. We've got to figure that out.
Woo.
And with that said, I know our time is winding down. Can you all give me one practice that you may engage in that includes creativity and imagination, or it embodies creativity and imagination?
Shalice, you ready? You ready?
You know, I dance probably like almost every day. You know, I find the time to cut on some music and just, you know, and just embody creativity in that way.
Yeah, I was. Oh,
you got it.
Go ahead, Angela. You sure?
Mine's quick.
Okay.
I just dream vocally with friends, like this kind of like we just talk about all kinds of stuff. It's like barbershop talk, but not the negative kind, but like really thinking about all the cool things. Oh, that'd be cool if we did this. Or sometimes it's comical, like sketch, like almost like SNL sketches, or the Astronomy Club on it and Netflix. But like sometimes it's about funny things that could. What if this happened? You know, what if somebody walked in right now and this happened? But a lot of times it's just these conversations where we're just dreaming about all the stuff that you can be in community because you bounce off of people. That is just, it's so encouraging, but it also, I walk away sometimes like, I'm gonna be that crazy person that tries that and see if it works, you know, so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, on that same spectrum, I think my practice that I want to name in this space is visualization. And not just sort of daydreaming, but I see myself, I see my family, I see my community as I want it to be. And so I see it in my mind. I actually kind of live out my own little scenes, you know, futuristic, like, okay, I can see myself standing on my land. You know, what is it going to feel like? Who's around me? Like, I spend a lot of time visualizing, and I think, you know, the creative part in that is, or of course the imaginative part, but the creative part is, and I think someone said it earlier, you have to be able to see something that's not here yet, you know, like you have to be able to see it, so at some point you can live into it. So yeah, visualization.
I talk to myself a whole lot, a lot. I use my rollover minutes with myself, but you know, hey, that's all right. And kind of like, I think, was it Angela? I'm a think talker. And so I really do value being in the company of other people, because I think then our dreams bump into other people's dreams, our visions bump into other people's visions, our brilliance bumps into one another. And then and like, you know, something Margaret also said is that instead of being like a scarcity mentality, we got to hoard it. It's kind of like we get blessed and released to when all it's not confusion or cacophony. It's just really literally just imagination layered on top of words. The other is, I want to just say really quickly, Donna, one of the most creative seasons of my life, or a season of my life where I was imagining the most, was when I turned 33. I decided I was going to try hobbies that as a child my family didn't have enough money for. So I took ballet. I'm not the Black Swan, friends, unfortunately. I took guitar lessons, and something about doing stuff that I wasn't going to be an expert at, but like I got to just try it, really did release me and unleash me in my vocation. So I think just cross-pollinating, like be a sous chef, you know, just try stuff, try doodle, try to be a painter.
Yeah, mine would be similar. One of mine is similar to yours, Margaret. I call them imaging or visioning prayers. I allow what I desire and what I want to see come be my prayer, right? That is what I'm asking. So I envision people healed. I envision, you know, what I want for my kids, you know. And so a part of that is envisioning prayer. But another part of that is in my storytelling, you know, whether it is through sermonic writing or whether it's, you know, one-to-one sessions that I'm doing with people. I am engaged in people's stories all the time. And so when I'm in a creative space, able to tell a story or reveal a story, for me, stories and the imagination and creativity of stories is what connects us to each other, is what helps us have empathy for others for whom we may have an experience that's not similar. It is a pathway to healing. And so storytelling is another way that I constantly engage in imagination. Well, sisters, I am so very thankful for you all and for this powerful conversation today. In closing, I want, Margaret, why don't you tell us if someone wants to get I Am Enough t-shirts, tell us where we can find them.
Y'all are beautiful models. So my website is www.mbisfree, MB is free, because I'm free, mbisfree.com. And there's a merchandise section. I have these shirts as well as shameless plug.
Hey.
my new Love Notes journal. It's a beautiful hardcover journal. And it's a love notes and affirmation journal for self-love. So if you're looking for a journal to cultivate more self-love, you can find it on my website. And thank you, Donna.
Well, until next time, you all, this has been Talks with GAWD, and we want you to be creative and imagine what you never thought possible, because we come from a people who say that it is. Until later, peace.